Alright, so now that the back of the chisel has been flattened, we need to work on this area down here. This is referred to as the bevel. And thinking about the bevel and then the back of the chisel, those two surfaces or two planes create our cutting edge, which is what's ultimately what we care about. That's why we're doing this. There's some geometry that we should discuss before we know what we want to do with respect to that angle. Alright, let me see if you can see this. Alright, so I've got three different examples here. This top one, let's say this is the chisel, back of the chisel here, this is the bevel. Let's say this one is at somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 degrees. 15 degrees would cut beautifully for exactly half a cut, possibly a full cut. But you'll notice how far extended this very tip is to what it is this chisel looks like. There's not a great deal of support on this part of the chisel, so this really sharp razor's edge would do great, but any amount of leverage or torque on this is just going to make this piece shear off, and then you're really back to square one. Now we have a really blunt or flat surface here that doesn't do any more cutting. Alright, one at the bottom is exactly the opposite. Let's say this one is 40 degrees. 40 degrees, maybe more. Maybe that's closer to 50. I don't know. But the point of this being, we've now satisfied that issue about having that long extension of material that is unsupported. We've got nothing but support here in the way that the bevel interacts with the back. The problem with this, well, the good news with this is it would stay sharp forever. We would virtually never need to sharpen this. Well, we would need to sharpen it at some point, but nowhere near what we need to do for most chisel operations. The problem with this is with any amount of force into a cut here, it's going to be so much resistance on this bevel against any material that's in front of it that this is just going to be so laborious to try to cut, try to chop, try to do anything it is we would ultimately want to do for our cutting operations. Alright, that brings us to the Goldilocks scenario here for our bevel angles. So for most Western chisels, 30 degrees is kind of a magic number where it's not too hot, not too cold. It's just right in the middle of what it is we want to do. It gives us the maximum amount of support and durability for the steel that we're using, and we don't have any weakness points in this that are largely noticeable. And it's easy to cut through because this bevel creates a bit of a ramp for any waste material to ride up. So for this purpose of the demonstration, we're going to be sharpening at 30 degrees. Let me see if I can get us refocused. Okay. Alright. So now we have back is flat. We need to hold this and maintain this at a 30-degree angle here. Now, assuming this has come from the factory at 30 degrees, I can continue to do this manually, holding that angle, and a lot of woodworkers have developed a sensitivity to being able to maintain this position, and they can continue to sharpen this way. The issue with this, and you probably notice what's happening here, any jutting, any grabbing that the stone does, it tends to have this chisel rocking as it's being pulled back. And so ultimately what that's going to create is no longer a flat plane, but more of a rounding surface, not nearly as efficient for what it is we want to cut. So I don't want to trust this. I want to use some guidance. So there are two general or more common honing guides or sharpening guides for what it is we want to do. This is in the ellipse style of sharpenings, or honing guides, pardon me. And these will mount the chisel into this position here. And it looks something kind of like this. Let me see if we can see what I'm doing. Okay. So it holds into the sides. That's how it's clamped or gripped. You'll notice that the back of the chisel is parallel to these two surfaces here and here. There's also a rolling wheel that will guide or allow this to glide over that honing guide as we're sharpening. Now, the issue with this is how do we maintain our angle, or how do we know what 30 degrees means for this honing guide? There are some marks here to tell us what the projection of this chisel from this guide needs to be in order for this to maintain a 30-degree angle. If you want a little bit more, a little bit less, you can tweak and modify those a bit, but let's say we're shooting for 30 degrees. So, so that's the easiest way to do it. What is an easy way to do a repeated dimension instead of measuring this out? There is a little hook right here. I can loosen this up, slide it against that hook, clamping it down. I always want to make sure that back of the chisel parallel to these surfaces. It's very easy to have this thing start to get clamped in, skewed, and hopefully you can see that, skewed in such a way that you're not going to get a very good cutting tool with that. But assuming I'm watching my marks and my alignment is good, I'll be able to keep those surfaces parallel to what it is I want to do. Using that in conjunction with this little stop, then I can get a 30-degree angle with this thing. Now, I've always had problems with trying to clamp this thing down, and I've never really been able to be strong enough to hold this or to use my fingers to grip this into place. So you'll notice there's a little slot here. I always come back with a slotted screwdriver and hold that in. This thing is not going anywhere now. So let's walk through that. Operation of this, I always want to land that wheel. Pardon me while I refocus. Alright. Land this wheel onto the sharpening stone, setting that one down first, then introducing that bevel. You'll notice until I get started here, and that horrible noise will go away here shortly, but we're going to have to get all the rust broken off on the inside. Alright, so you'll notice what I'm doing is I'm pushing it forward on the wheel. The blade is not making any contact with the sharpening stone. Then I drop it down to the sharpening stone, making sure to keep pressure just on the chisel, not on the two sides. It'd be really easy to start rocking this thing and creating a curved stone. So good pressure right on the chisel, and then just pulling back. Raising it back up, dropping it down. Alright, once I've done that, I can see that I'm getting consistent scratches all the way across, which is exactly what I want. And I'll continue to do that until it looks like this corner and that corner there, they're the low spots on those 2 points. So I'll need to continue doing this until those go away. Now that I have the majority of that bevel engaged, I can go back and forth with this, which basically doubles the amount of abrasion that you're doing. Should make this go faster. Yeah, it's looking better. Alright. Every time I introduce this to the stone, wheel goes down first, the blade's not touching, then gently landing it, pulling it back forth. When I'm ready to check it out, just the opposite. I pull this thing back, remove it from the stone. If I don't do that, what happens is I get into this situation where I'm pulling this thing back, and then I start to tip the chisel up here, and then if I pull or push, it's going to start to dull that tip. That's the whole reason we're here. I'm trying to really make sure to protect that. Okay, that looks pretty great. Alright, so continue to do this back and forth until I'm happy with this. And that is the Eclipse style honing guide, and these are really affordable to get into for around 15 bucks. There are fancier versions of this that hold on the sides of the chisel, but this is all you need, and these work well. I think some people would prefer a slightly larger wheel here, gives a bit more of a triangulation of stability. narrow wheel here can be a little bit tricky if you have a chisel that is the same width or worse, narrower than that wheel. Then it can start to rock a little bit, and that's kind of the big criticism of this style. These work well on Western style chisels. Some Japanese style chisels, you start running into some problems about how this holds, and it sometimes engages with not the corner of the back here, but the corner underneath where the back is, where that bevel angle on the sides, it starts to pinch, and it will start to reposition in a way that's not really parallel to these guys. This one is really great when you're ready to sharpen a plane blade. So let's say I've done this, worked my way up the grits, now I'm ready to pull this thing out, and then fine tune it a little bit more. What was I going to say? Oh, plane blade. So with a plane blade, it will rest here because it's usually wider than the chisels that we're sharpening here, and then same rules apply. It clamps on both sides. Projection is a little bit different. We have a chisel here, but if I were sharpening a plane blade, I've got a marked hook here. It has a slightly lower projection. Typically plane blades want to be around 25 degrees, not for low angle planes or bevel up planes, but for most bevel down hand planes, your 25 degree for a plane is about where you want to go. So anyway, two different hooks. 5 degree doesn't sound like much, but it does make a huge difference when you're getting into the physical operation of these tools. Alright, so again, 1/4 inch wide chisel. I've done it. The one criticism of this style of stone, as I said, now that I have a narrower chisel than that wheel, it's going to be easier for this thing to rock, but it also starts to limit where this is going to clamp. So 1/4 inch I'm probably okay. If I had a narrower chisel than that, I might run out of threads to engage and hold this chisel and get it sharp. And so these do have their limitations, but for 15 bucks you can do most of the sharpening you'll ever want to do. Alright, there's another honing guide here. This is a Veritas. I believe it's MK2. Here we go. This is a different style in that we place the chisel inside here and it clamps the back, and then where the opposite face, the top of the chisel would be. There are no clamping on the sides of this particular style of honing guide. The thing to remember, and you'll notice wider wheel compared to the Eclipse style. Carefully putting this thing in here, and then it will clamp down, as I said, in the thickness of this. What I want to do is make sure that this chisel is dead center in relationship to where that wheel is. I also want to make sure that this chisel is not coming off at an angle, or if it is, I'm going to have a skew chisel in a hurry. So they've thought of that as well, and they've created this setup tool for this honing guide. There is this little way that this slides into. It will ask me on these numbers what width of chisel I'm sharpening. So I align this little mark here with that scale that they have. And the reason that's important is that there is a little lip on the sides here and here, which will allow you to align the chisel into this orientation here. So this chisel rests against that little lip. There's a stop here, so I can't advance this any further than what my geometry wants to be. Once I've got that, then I clamp down these two knobs. Alright, making sure that that's pretty symmetrical. That looks good. Good, okay. Scale that these things require, there's a couple scales here, but we're looking at the standard angles here. I have this set at 30 degrees, that's where that stop is, and 30 degrees for this Western chisel is what I want. So now I am all done with, get out of here. tool for the job, they say. Okay. Removing this piece here, that exposes the chisel. Be very careful when you're pulling this part that your fingers are not dragging across that edge. But this is the setup for what it is we want to do. Still working up the grits, so I'm starting at 800, keeping this well lubricated. Same rules apply. I'm dropping this wheel first, then the bevel goes down, sliding this thing back. Once I'm comfortable, then I can start going back and forth. I want to see or inspect what it is I'm doing. That looks pretty good. Alright, coming with a little glow spot on the corner here, but won't take long to get rid of. You'll find when you're sharpening that the back takes up the lion's share of your time. Once you get to the bevel stage, there's so much less material on the bevel that it should go much quicker. And that's there. That's there. Okay. Alright, cool. Setting this thing aside. Because I've already sharpened the back, I don't need to introduce the back onto the stone again, except there is one small exception. In the process of doing this level of sharpening, and I just repositioned, I was over on the left, I want to hit the right a little bit, I want to take advantage of the full stone. If I just stay in one track in the center, it's going to dish right there, and so I want to minimize the amount of dishing I can get, especially on narrow chisels. Okay, so getting back to the conversation with the back, and that looks pretty great. Okay, the process here of abrading the bevel is going to force this metal to curl around to the back, and that creates something called a burr. And I can feel it right there. And some people use this little burr, and I wish I could show you. It's imperceptible on this camera for sure, but you can feel it. Some people use that burr, making sure it goes all the way across to make sure that all of the bevel is being sharpened. And that's a fine way to approach it, but ultimately I want to always visually inspect what's happening with the bevel. If the bevel looks consistent, scratches are all the same level of shine, then I know I'm in good shape. So this burr is going to be important to be aware of, because I don't want to drag my thumb across it this way, because that could, depending on how long it is, I could just shear it right off, and then I'd have to restart with sharpening the bevel. So it's there. I feel it, which is good. It means I'm doing my job. If I wanted to knock that burr down with the honing guide in place, I'll be able to drop the back on, and just with a couple of passes I can remove that burr, and that's gone. Then I'll go back. This is my last grit now. This is 8,000. Give a little inspection of this. I go through a lot of cloths and paper towels when I'm sharpening. Yeah, that's great. Okay. This is going to be slightly misleading. Watch me sharpen these things, because again, this is not the first time I've sharpened this chisel. It's always going to be faster the next time you resharpen. So what I do to gauge when I'm done, it looks great, the back looks great, I'm getting good consistent shine all the way across, which is what I want, but I need a little bit more of an immediate feedback on that bevel. I know you can't see this here, but I'm really looking for that mirror polish on the bevel, as much as I can get with the 8,000 stone. So for me, those two planes are doing what they need to do. Where are you? Oh, there you are. But I like to use my thumbnail to just introduce my thumbnail into the sharpening or into the sharp chisel. I don't want to put a lot of pressure into that. I definitely don't want to touch my skin onto that. My thumbnail gives me enough resistance so that it's not going to allow this to cut through my finger or my thumb. And then the other thing with this is that I'm going to apply just gentle pressure in, and I'm going to try to drag laterally. Sorry,